Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. And Awesome Ward, this is a big time podcast. This is championship week. This is when, forget about gold pants. Those are passe, as we found out in this COVID-19 era of college football. It's the rings, man. The trophies and the rings. Those are what matter most now for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Correct?
That's right. Ring season, championship season. It's certainly been a weird journey to get there, but there'll be some sense of normalcy for the Buckeyes just to be back in this position. There won't be fans in Indianapolis, which will obviously change things a little bit, but the stakes are high, and these are the games that they live to play every single year. Knock on wood that they get to Saturday, both teams ready to go.
Yeah, fourth straight year they're going to be playing in Indianapolis for a chance at the Big Ten championship, going for 4 in a row. That's remarkable by any measure.
Yep.
Whatever the era, whatever the circumstances, and these, of course, are the strangest because Ohio State went 5-0, didn't get to play that coveted 6th game to qualify for the Big Ten championship game. Yet when cooler heads prevailed, they looked and said, "Well, you know what? Ohio State beat the team that would be going. Ohio State's number 4 in the country. Let's go ahead and shove them in there," and they did. We talked about that all week last week. But Ohio State versus Northwestern, that's about right for this season, isn't it?
Yeah, I did not have Northwestern penciled in as in those contenders out west. Go back and talk about our preseason conversations, and it was, can Wisconsin be the flag bearer and set up a huge showdown? Maybe Iowa, maybe Minnesota, if P.J. Fleck can keep things rolling before they wound up losing a ton of guys and a lot of talent and a lot of having other issues. And, really, you'd name almost everybody out west except Northwestern because they were so bad last year. And that 52-3 beatdown in Evanston, that still sticks in my mind. But, they played good football when they had to. The loss to Michigan State is pretty puzzling and troubling. And I don't think it bodes well for Saturday against the Buckeyes. But, they didn't stumble into this. They earned their way in.
Yeah, we're going to get into all of that real quickly when I get back, including, Pat Fitzgerald almost rooting for somebody in Ohio State to say something derogatory about the Northwestern and its chances this coming week. Pat Fitzgerald, one of my favorite guys, man. The guy, he's second only to Kirk Ferentz in longevity now in the Big Ten. He's not the president, but he's the dean. Let's put it that way, of Big Ten coaches, and you got to give it up to him. Northwestern does this, but when they do this, it's a pretty big deal, at least in the Chicago area. Northwestern, Chicago's Big Ten team. But bottom line is they're in the game no matter how they got there, some close wins earlier in the year, and then, of course, that puzzling loss to Michigan State just when it looked like Northwestern might go undefeated through the regular season. They come back and they clinch it, the Big Ten West berth. Like you said, in this strangest of years, there's Northwestern versus Ohio State for the second time in 3 years playing for the Big Ten championship, right?
I'll take it. Let's get that game played. And you're right. Through the ups and downs, I think Northwestern is rewarded by the fact that they identified someone who wanted to be their coach. Pat Fitzgerald, as tough-minded as they come, he doesn't give up, but he hasn't looked to escape to the NFL or other jobs that have been offered just after one bad season or a recognition that they will not be annual contenders. He's built a program that once every couple of years can jump up and bite and contend. And, this is maybe not the finest example of that compared to one for maybe a couple of years ago. But when you play a Northwestern team that they're going to give you everything they've got, even if they're overmatched on paper.
Yeah, you know what? I've got a special guest again this week. We're going to shove him in here right now. Bill Bender, one of our good friends on the college football beat, Sporting News, sportingnews.com. He's an astute observer of the scene. I introduce him with that. I ought to record that every time when I have him on. That way I don't have to be redundant and or leave something out glowing about him. But what I love about him is, number one, he's very conversational. Number two, he lives in Pickerington, or as he calls it, Picktown. Most people call it Picktown. And, I've known him for quite a few years now. You have too. But, he had a great observation over the weekend of the scenarios that could play out through after championship weekend is over, if there are upsets or if status quo is held, how that top four is going to play out, who the matchups are going to be in the college football playoff semifinals a week from today, which we'll be talking about. But let's get to that interview with him real quick, and I'll be back, and we're going to just kind of chop up this Ohio State Northwestern game in really small morsels. We won't be right. We'll be very conservative with our words, right? Right, Austin?
Always.
Yeah. Notice I called you Austin there instead of awesome, because I did want to call you Posturpedic today, but that's an inside joke nobody would get but me. But we'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, with Awesome Ward after this little interview I had with Bill Bender. As promised, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back with one of my favorite people and definitely one of my favorite guests, Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Bill, welcome again to the Tim May podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Hey, Tim, last time I was on here, I was accused of not brushing my hair by a good friend. So I'm all showered. I'm clean. I've used shampoo and everything. So hopefully I look good enough for this podcast. It's a high standard I know you guys set over here.
Yeah, a friend of mine had a great saying about that. When you get up in the morning, I'll leave out the bad first word. I'll just say it's poop, shower, shave, and shampoo.
Yep, that's what we're doing. Well, I mean, you could say that's a description about this college football season in some ways. Yeah. We're just trying to get through it one day at a time. I mean, we're down to the stretch run here. For me, it's been exciting. I'm sure for you, and you've done this for a number of years. I mean, have you ever been a part of a season quite like this?
No. I mean, it's this is unique, is one unto itself, and what's really definitely the fly in the ointment, without a doubt. And I don't agree with what Dabo Swinney said, but I will agree with the idea that the more games you play, the more jeopardy you put yourself in, as Florida found out the other night. And you're really comparing apples and oranges in terms of schedules this year, because everybody wants to just jump on since Penn State and Michigan have had such a tough year, the Big Ten is down, all that. You don't know that. How do you know Indiana's not really good? I think Indiana's pretty darn good. I mean, their only loss is to Ohio State, which is number 4 in the country, right on down the line. And so all these arguments are popping up as Urban Meyer said, the look test. I hate that those two words. And I agree with him 100%, the look test, but that's all you got going for you this year. You agree with that, right?
Right. I mean, you can make the argument that Notre Dame and Clemson shouldn't play this week. It would be in their best interest not to play, because then they would sit there with one loss each and be in the playoff. You could have made the argument last week that it was in the best interest for Alabama and Florida not to play. And Florida got bit. You can go into the reasons why. And, that Austin Powers meme got a lot of run after the guy threw the shoe last week. But it is. And that's why with Ohio State, I thought, even though they didn't play last week, the Big Ten did what was in the best interest of the conference. It was a business decision. And I kept telling people, Tim, here was my thing with that whole deal. I said, okay, let's say that Ohio State would have kept the Big Ten keeps Ohio State out of the Big Ten championship. So you go into this weekend with Northwestern and Indiana playing in Indianapolis, Ohio State probably playing Iowa. Maybe it's in Iowa City, maybe it's in Columbus, and the Big Ten getting universally mocked on social media worse than anything else they've been mocked about this season. That's exactly what would have happened. So Kevin Warren did what was in best interest of the conference.
Well, and the other thing, the other part of that equation, of that algorithm is the way I look at it, is Ohio State had already beaten Indiana. So Ohio State clinched the Big Ten East, as I call it, the Big East, the week before by beating Michigan State with one game left on its Big East schedule, if you follow my drift. And so you could clearly make the argument that Ohio State belongs in the Big Ten championship game, except for this rule they threw in during this one weird, stupid season we're dealing with right now. And so, there are all kinds of ways you can look at it. Hey, before I get into what I want to ask you about the pairings, because I like the pairings that you guys played out. You played out on the Sporting News over the weekend, the possibilities. If A, then B. If B, then C. If A and B, then C. You know what I mean? The old logic class from way back, Logic 101 or whatever it was. Is Alabama the best team in the country, in your opinion?
Yeah, right now. I think with the way they've played the last 5 weeks, it's hard to argue that they're not. I mean, averaging over 50 points per game, 3 Heisman candidates. It's kind of like Ohio State last year when they had 3 Heisman candidates. You would, if you gave it to Devontae, Najee, or Mac Jones, I probably wouldn't put up a fight with any one of those guys the way they're playing. Their defense is probably the bigger story, though, Tim. Allowing 7 points per game in the last 5 weeks, playing at a high level. But again, this is kind of reminiscent of Ohio State last year, where Ohio State just totally obliterated the Big Ten. And then you get in that heavyweight fight, and it's a little bit different. And I do think before we, I know we're going to hash out what could happen, those 4 teams that are in the top 4 right now are the heavyweights. And anything can happen when an Alabama plays in Ohio State or a Clemson plays in Alabama. I mean, we've seen that. But as of now, what's on film and what we've seen on TV, Alabama's the best team in the country right now. But that can change.
Yeah, and here's the way I judge teams anymore. I mean, I've always judged them like this, but it's more acute, in my opinion, this season is the top 4, in my opinion, in no particular order, are Alabama, Notre Dame, both undefeated, Clemson, and then Ohio State, which is undefeated. All 4 of those teams can run and throw the ball. They can line up and gash you with their running game. More so Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State, I think, than Notre Dame. But still, Notre Dame has a nice offense. I would rate them number 4 of the offenses. But that's what you got to have. And the thing about it is Alabama hasn't really played a complete team, since that Ole Miss game, which, Ole Miss just lit them up. And these teams all have the ability, including Florida this weekend, to throw the ball, which I do believe is Alabama's Achilles, just like it is any big team's Achilles, because that's where the fewer defenders are. So, that's just football 101 from Tim A. Yours truly. You can send donations to my Medicare fund. But I digress. That's why I like all 4 of these teams. They've all been able to play big-time offense when needed this year. And I think that's the big difference between them and Texas A&M, which has been kind of spotty with Kellen Mond and those guys. I mean, I can look at teams and see, just like we were talking about the look test, and I can see what I really like in those 4 teams, which is why I would have them my top 4 almost no matter what happens this weekend. But, of course, you can't do it that way, right?
Right. I mean, obviously, Alabama, I think they're the only team that can lose this weekend and still get in, for sure.
Yeah.
I think Alabama's in regardless. And unless Florida somehow beats them by 30, which isn't going to happen, I think they're in. But all 4 of those teams have a lot of the same things. They've all had high-level quarterback play. I mean, Justin Fields, Ian Book, Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence has been doing it for 3 years. I mean, all 4 of those teams have the quarterback. All 4 of those teams have some question on defense. For Notre Dame, it's, do you have the 4- and 5-star athletes that can compete? Now, they answered that bell once. Can they do it twice? Ohio State, back-end issues. Alabama had some issues, like you said, defending the pass, and Clemson's probably younger on D than they've ever been.
Yep.
So, to me, I mean, that adds up to, when you get to the playoff, if it is these 4 teams, we have 2 pretty good semifinals. And I think Florida, there is a little bit of a sentiment of, is Florida in if they win? Maybe, but again, no 2-loss team has made the playoff. And that's something that could get real interesting here over the next 7 days.
Well, here's the problem for the committee. Number one, we're recording this on Monday, drops on Tuesday. The college football playoff rankings come out Tuesday night, so we don't know exactly where Florida is going to plummet, or will Florida plummet. The way the committee operates with their SEC, they do have an SEC bent, or at least gives the SEC teams, I think, the benefit of the doubt more often than not. But if Florida does beat the team that you've been saying for weeks is your number 1 team, you've heard Gary Barta just kind of rave about Alabama and what the committee thinks of Alabama. If Florida does beat Alabama, how is Florida not in it? I mean, when you really break it down, I mean, they lose to LSU. Yeah, I mean, who throws a shoe, honestly? But how are they not in it? But then again, if you're considering them, how is Texas A&M not in it if that all happens? But then again, how do you drop Alabama all the way out? I mean, so what is your take? If Florida beats Alabama this weekend, and by the way, Florida can beat Alabama this weekend because they can throw the ball as well as anybody. Kyle Trask and that group of receivers, Trevon Grimes, who for a brief moment in his life was an Ohio State Buckeye. But what do you do, Bill Bender of Sporting News, with Alabama and Florida if Florida pulls the upset this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to leave them out in some scenarios. And I think there are a couple scenarios out there where they do get in. So the big question becomes, who does that impact the most? Who gets maybe taken out of the playoff as a result? And you would have to look at the ACC championship loser as being in a little bit of trouble, because we've seen that matchup twice now. So if Clemson loses, they're out. I mean, at least in my opinion, they'd be out. I mean, 2 losses, that kind of stuff there. I mean, they wouldn't have much of a claim if Notre Dame beat them a second time. Now, if Notre Dame loses and Florida wins, we're going to have a very interesting conversation with those 2 teams, because we know of the SEC brand power, the value of an Alabama victory versus who Notre Dame beat up on the ACC, a 2-loss team versus a 1-loss team. And that message that you hear the committee, and you've heard them say it how many times, Tim, that they talk about the 4 very best teams.
Yeah.
And will parrot that line a lot if Florida beats Alabama and try to justify getting 2 SEC teams in. I wouldn't like it personally, but I think that's what would happen.
Yeah. But like you said, I mean, how do you put Florida in and not have Alabama? I mean, how do you put Alabama in and not have Florida in? And it's going to, they're going to earn their hors d'oeuvres, if in fact they're all meeting together again this weekend, they're going to earn their hors d'oeuvres that are delivered to the meeting room, I do believe. But what is right this year, Bill? I mean, let's get back to that original Dabo Swinney comment. What is the right thing to do this year, in your opinion? Has Ohio State shown you enough to make them one of the top 4 teams in the country?
I mean, yeah, they have to me. I mean, people don't like it, but I think the number of games by and large isn't their fault. I mean, 2 of the 3 other teams had issues. They looked good enough. And now if they would have slammed the door a little bit harder on Indiana, I don't think there'd be much of a debate. But the fact that they let Indiana back in the game a little bit, start asking questions about their back end, and then their strength of schedule, I mean, if we're truth be told, it's not that great. But, when you've won 20 consecutive Big Ten games, which they have, when you're a heavy favorite against Northwestern, and they've beat Northwestern by like 27 points over the last 8 meetings. I think the single biggest shock of the weekend would be if Northwestern beat Ohio State. Now that would set off some really chaotic events for the playoff committee. And there's a reason why Ohio State's a 27-point favorite. They're that much better than everybody else in the Big Ten.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to keep you. You're a popular man these days, because you're one of those guys who knows everything, just doesn't, except when you have conversations with your wife, I'm sure, just like me. Alabama wins. Clemson wins. Ohio State wins. What is the Final Four, in your opinion, in that scenario?
Well, the score of the Notre Dame-Clemson game is going to be under scrutiny. I was told a story about sitting in the ACC championship game when Ohio State was playing Wisconsin and running up the score that year. And I said, they're going to run this score right past TCU and Baylor. And that can happen. I mean, Notre Dame could lose by 28. And then, okay, do we let an A&M or a Cincinnati or somebody like that in? Those discussions will happen. But as it stands, if Notre Dame keeps that within 14-17, which I think they will, I don't think they're going to win. You'll have Alabama, who's going to win, Ohio State, who's going to win, Notre Dame 4. So they'll put Alabama against Notre Dame 1 and 4. Probably put that at the Sugar Bowl, and then you get a Clemson Ohio State rematch again. I don't know where they're going to put it if they have the Rose Bowl, but where the Rose Bowl will be is the big question. But I think you get what you want. Now, the dream scenario for the networks would be, and I don't know how they can work it, if they could get Alabama and Clemson in the semi and get Notre Dame and Ohio State in the semi, you make just that much more in viewership. I mean, you know how it is around here with Ohio State and Notre Dame. I mean, when Notre Dame's right, and they are, Ohio State Notre Dame chatter can reach the level of Ohio State Michigan chatter. It really can.
Agreed. So does the committee take that into account, do you believe? Do do they take into it? That's why I want them to go to eight teams just this year only, because it could have solved some of these conundrums that everybody's dealing with, or justifications, I guess is the better term, of who should be in and who should be out. But do you think the committee takes into account television draw?
Oh, no, but there is something to, do we have to watch Notre Dame Clemson 3 times?
Exactly.
And I think there is, that's why I think even if they could probably justify the seeding to make sure those two are split. And especially if the Clemson Notre Dame game is pretty good, which I think it will be.
Let me interrupt you because I've had this same conversation with my buddy Awesome Ward. But you would still set up a scenario where they could play again. They could play a third time. I mean, just to presuppose that they're, one of them's going to lose in the semi and one's going to win, or vice versa, or both lose. You're still setting up a scenario. Hey, we've seen this movie twice already this year, or could we possibly see it a third time? Is that really fair to the populace? I mean, is that really fair to, giving somebody else a shot like a Cincinnati or, but Texas A&M, they're sitting there in the SEC West. They've already lost to Alabama, lost pretty big, but that was early in the year. I remember I was listening to that game when I came back from covering a auto race at Indianapolis this year. And, but is that right? In this year, shouldn't you spread that? Shouldn't you open your eyes a little bit and maybe let in a Cincinnati or somebody like that? I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, that again would have to, if Clemson blows out Notre Dame, that could happen. That could open up that door. And Clemson has won the last 5 ACC championship games by 24 and 24.5 points. This is the first ACC championship game in 6 years worth watching in a lot of ways.
Agreed.
So, I mean, that could happen. You could open up the door for a Cincinnati. I still don't think Texas A&M has much of a playoff case, in my opinion, even if they beat Tennessee. I mean, every other team in the field right now can lose to Alabama by 28 points just as well as Texas A&M did. They don't have a conference championship. They're not playing for one. They haven't done enough to me to earn that, even though they may slip in. Who knows? Cincinnati has. And if Cincinnati's the team to me that's getting overshadowed, but in the big business nature of it all, if the committee's sitting there and Notre Dame loses by 13 to Clemson and Cincinnati's sitting there undefeated, whether it's right or wrong is irrelevant. They're going to pick Notre Dame.
Exactly. Because you don't know what you don't know. See, that's the thing. I mean, you could say, well, Cincinnati doesn't play a representative schedule, but you could also argue that Ohio State, except for Indiana, play a representative schedule, of big time power opponents this year. Yeah, Power 5 by title only, in some respects when it comes to Michigan. Well, they didn't play Michigan, but Penn State, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, I would, but you're right. It would be hard to leave a draw like Notre Dame sitting on the bench. That's the other part of it, in a year when you definitely want eyeballs on those games. And so let's get right back down to it and I'll let you go. Who is your coming out of Saturday again? What will be your Final Four and where will they play?
No, I think we've hashed it out. And I think, Alabama wins, Ohio State wins. There's not much drama in those games. I think Clemson, Notre Dame can win that game. They've done it once. They can do it again. But I think Clemson finds a way, turns it up in the second half, wins by 10-14, and we get the scenario we talked about. We get Alabama and Clemson, or Alabama and Notre Dame, which last time they met in 12, that didn't go so well for the Irish. And then you get I think this works out for Ohio State the best way possible, because before COVID-19, the biggest talking point around Columbus and Ohio State football was missing an opportunity to beat Clemson. Whether it was the refs, the bad calls, the drop touchdown pass, the letting Clemson take the ball, whatever the reasons were. Clemson won the football game, okay? So getting that rematch against Clemson, get another chance to see Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence go at it, that works out because Dabo, other than, you can make a case that is he public enemy 1B in Columbus in some ways, the way that he, A, beats the Buckeyes and B, isn't afraid to tweak them either? I mean, you tell me. I'd say he's up there.
I think he's right there. He might be 1A. I mean, when you get right down to it, because I'm not sure who 1A would be at this point. If you follow my,
Oh, it's always hard. It's always whoever's coaching Michigan. That's the answer there. But 17-2 over the last 19 years.
has kind of changed that a little bit. You're right. It might be 1A again next year, but yeah, I mean, Dabo went and opened his big mouth, and now, it's basically challenged. So is Sankey to a certain extent. So now they've got to kind of back it up. But yeah, I think, Wyatt Davis and Sean Wade, for example, returned to Ohio State. And I think one of the thoughts in their mind, yeah, they wanted to play against Michigan again, but they wanted another shot at the college football national championship, and they wanted another shot at Clemson. You do believe, and that may be the way it works out. So yeah, I think that would be the dream matchup. I think in a lot of people's eyes, take care of this and then go for a national championship. But we'll see. Hey, last thing, does Cincinnati deserve to be in the conversation more seriously than it is?
Yes. I mean, but I'm a Mac grad. So
yeah.
I had this argument with Mike DeCourcy last week. I said, if they're not going to let Cincinnati in, and they're not going to seriously entertain a team that's beat ranked teams, that's played within the confines of their schedule, that's looked pretty good doing it, Group 5 should just do their own playoff. And there's literally millions of reasons why they won't in terms of TV deals. But I told them, I mean, as a Mac graduate, at some point, this is the only sport where 60-plus teams have zero shot to win a national championship before you even get started. And I'm not talking about the Power 5 schools that can't do it anyway. I'm talking about those Group 5 schools. There's no chance. So to me, it makes more sense. And I would rather watch my alma mater, Ohio University, instead of Spencer will co-sign this, and instead of the Potato Bowl, the Bahamas Bowl, the .com Bowl, whatever they come up with. I'd rather, if they won the MAC, which they haven't done since '68, I'd rather watch them in the Final Four against San Jose State, Cincy, and Coastal, and get a trophy and get something that's other than the Camellia Bowl for it. Now, the novelty of that would wear off after a few years. I understand that. But I said, the best way around it is if one of those teams were invited to the big playoff, they can decline the Group of 5 playoff. It's an easy fix. Plus, you'd get more ratings out of those other games.
Oh, I agree 100%. And, like you just said, the newness would wear off and stuff, but then you'd come up with something else. We way back when I was growing up, there was no BCS, the college football. What was it? I forgot the name of the football coalition came along, and then the BCS came along and got Big Ten and Pac-12 involved. And now you have a 14 playoff. And, if we're not headed to an 18 playoff, then I think you're right. I think it would behoove everyone to kind of make that little split and give people something to play for. And then when that wears off, move on to an 18 playoff in the Power 5, include one of those teams, blah, blah. Everything evolves for a reason. The main thing is to attract people, because this is the commercial enterprise. You want to keep attracting eyeballs to the TV and fannies to the seats. And, we'll see where it goes. But you're right. I agree with your assessment of the Final Four, the way it's going to come out. And because I could see why it would make sense to put Ohio State in the Rose Bowl against a Clemson, and to put Alabama against Notre Dame, justify keeping Notre Dame in there with one loss if, in fact, Clemson beats Notre Dame. But we'll see how it comes out, because one thing we've learned this year more than any other, don't take for granted what you think you're going to see. Just sit back and enjoy it, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's one day at a time. It's one game at a time, and it's like everything else. I mean, as we get into basketball season, it's going to be the same way. I've started to turn an eye towards some Big Ten basketball, and it's been cool to see because you're just watching games. So it is. I think it's going to be a fun playoff. Of all the crazy things that have happened this year, we're probably going to get a familiar conclusion. It's going to be Alabama versus either Clemson or Ohio State, or maybe Notre Dame in the college football championship game. And probably the most normal thing in the world would be an Alabama national championship, unfortunately, with Nick Saban. But Clemson and Ohio State and Notre Dame have something to say about that. And I'm looking forward to that playoff in general, because I think they've been the 4 best teams from what I've seen. And I know Ohio State has the small sample, but there's no reason why they can't play with those teams.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Bender, one of my favorite people, for Sporting News, sportingnews.com, coming to you live on video recording from Picktown, known as Pickerington, Ohio. Bill Bender, thanks for joining the Tim A podcast again, my man. I owe you breakfast again.
No problem. But thanks for having me on. As always, you can check out our content at sportingnews.com. You guys are always great to me. So hope you're staying safe, staying well, and we can do this again soon.
You got it. And we'll be right back with Awesome Ward, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned. Bill Bender, one of my favorite people. I think I've said that 4 times already, right? Awesome. But, he has insight on the national scene. A lot of people out there conjecturing what could happen. But real quick, let's just put it this way. Ohio State takes care of Northwestern. Alabama takes care of Florida. Clemson barely beats Notre Dame. What's your final 4 hookups?
Which scenario is this? Notre Dame barely beats Clemson?
No, Clemson barely beats Notre Dame, and then Ohio State and Alabama hold sway.
Yeah, then Alabama, let's see. I think that Ohio State's going to move up to number 3 no matter what scenario. So
they can put them in the Rose Bowl, right?
Yeah. Well, and I don't know where the Rose Bowl is going to be played.
Exactly.
But, I expect that the winner in the ACC championship game will play Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, even if that's name only and not the specific stadium. I think that's the scenario. I just can't see. Well, Florida is not anywhere near good enough to challenge Alabama. I view that the same way, and Bill wrote this in his breakdown at Sporting News, that there's really no point in breaking down these scenarios with a Florida upset or a Northwestern upset. They're almost impossible to think about happening in real life. Alabama will be the number 1 seed. I think that, the winner of the ACC game will be the number 2. If Clemson loses, I think that's the most interesting one because, both of their losses will be to Notre Dame. 2-loss teams do not, as Ohio State can attest from a couple years ago, get the benefit of the doubt. Be interested to see who the number 4 seed against Alabama is because I don't believe that Texas A&M is deserving, but somebody has to be the 4 seed. Someone's going to have to play in that game. I think that's the only one that's truly interesting is if Notre Dame, handles Clemson twice, and this time with Trevor Lawrence, what that would mean for Clemson and likely missing the field.
Well, what bothers me is the way the committee, and ladies and gentlemen, the newest rankings will come out basically later on tonight. We're recording this. This drops on a Tuesday morning at lettermenrow.com, my podcast. But they moved Iowa State up to number 7 last, I think, if I remember correctly, number 7 last week ahead of UC. And Iowa State's got 2 losses. And are they trying to set people up here? Maybe there could be a 2-loss team in there, but it might be Iowa State out of the Big 12. Because they're playing for the Big 12 championship this week against Oklahoma. Yeah, stranger things have happened, haven't they?
Yeah, I really think that if they didn't regret that already on Tuesday when that came out, and you look at the loss that they had to Louisiana, putting them ahead of Cincinnati with a chance to stay undefeated this week and get another top 25 win over Tulsa, it didn't do them any good, I think, to move Iowa State ahead unless they were really angling down the road, which doesn't make a lot of sense because they say they don't project forward. I don't know why they would be trying to put credibility on a Big 12 championship game that wasn't going to be there on its own merits. And nobody believes that the Big 12 should be in the playoff with both Iowa State and Oklahoma having lost twice. That they've been ruled out for a while with good reason. They are not one of the top 4 teams in the country.
Something's going on.
Yeah.
Something's going on there. I mean, personally, it wouldn't bother me to see the Big 12 champion in the playoff, and that way you'd have 4. That way you'd have 4 Power 5 champions 4 Power 5 champions in the playoff. That'd be okay, wouldn't it?
Well,
in this weird year,
I think that USC has clearly not looked like a top 4 team in their wins, but they're also undefeated. And Ryan Day made this point himself on Sunday, talking about how weird it is to measure style points and the way that games work, and that this is the only sport in the world where you're not counting solely wins and losses. You're trying to parse how a team won and how effective it was in doing so. Those of us who have covered college football or followed college football for our whole lives know that that's part of the deal. The beauty pageant and the comparisons of uneven schedules. I don't believe that USC could beat anybody in the top 4. I'm not sure they can beat anybody in the top 10. But if they're undefeated and win the Pac-12, I would much rather personally see that team get the benefit of the doubt ahead of 2-loss Big 12 champion, especially if it's Iowa State, given that one really kind of head-scratching loss to Louisiana that's on there by 17 points early in the year.
Agreed.
That's
Agreed.
That's just me.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think with this late start, the Pac-12 has gotten short shrift in this thing, and especially an undefeated USC, that would be a draw. That would be a draw. I mean, whether they're deserving or not, that would be a draw. Hey, let's get to the game that matters for Ohio State. I know everybody is just already going, well, like you just said about Florida has no chance against Alabama. Florida does have a chance against Alabama because he can throw the ball. And if you can throw the ball, you've got a shot against Alabama. Florida's problem is, can they stop Alabama? But if you can make it a shootout, hey, anything can happen in a shootout if it gets to the fourth quarter. That's just my take on that. Yeah, the big thing here is to write off Northwestern. Ohio State, the last I looked, was at least a 3-touchdown favorite, maybe moving closer to 4. Isn't that correct, Austin?
Yeah, it opened at 20, and that was always destined to go up, especially like they opened the betting for that on Thursday or Friday. The matchup is confirmed, and then you got to watch Northwestern struggle for a half with Illinois in really ugly football. So that'll go up. Alabama's will go up because of what you saw. You're talking about Florida being able to throw the football. I think some of this Kyle Trask hype has got a little bit out of control where people were anointing him as the Heisman favorite. And if you can't throw the football on LSU or avoid costly turnovers the way that he had in that game, this particular LSU defense without really any of their top cornerbacks on the field, I mean, good luck. Alabama's players may have, had some games where they got gashed, most notably Ole Miss, but I would be stunned if they had problems defending Trask in Florida on Saturday.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he threw 2 interceptions. He also threw 2 touchdown passes and threw for 424 yards. So his problem was the turnovers.
Well, that's
still. Yeah, I'm with you 150%. I think Mac Jones and Devontae Smith and those guys, Alabama, will hold sway. But I just think whenever you can throw the ball, you have a puncher's chance against anybody. That's why when I look at Northwestern, Peyton Ramsey, I think, is put new life. Like you're talking about, what's the difference between Northwestern this year compared to last year? Last year they didn't have a quarterback. They've got a guy who's at least has played. He's played against Ohio State. Has shown, as Ryan Day said, he's got that it factor about him. I mean, he's a leader. You can see that. He understands the game. He understands not to be sloppy with the ball, et cetera. So they've got a what do you want to call it? A yeoman's offense, but their defense, I think, is credible. I mean, their defense, as I brought it up with Ryan, Mike Hankwitz, their noted defensive coordinator, he puts solid, sound defenses on the field. Like I said to Ryan, you got to root them out of there almost, but meaning they're going to be in the right place at the right time. Now you've got to make a play or block them out of the way. And we'll see how that goes. Because, that game 2 years ago, that was an interesting game for the Big Ten championship. They did sort of slow down the Ohio State big-time rolling offense, if you remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, they've played a good – I'm mainly remembering last year's 52-3 game. That's the one that sticks in my mind. But certainly that was competitive 2 years ago. Ohio State, I'm trying to remember, did they wind up with 45 in that game? Was it 45-28 or something like that?
It was grudging, but the yards were grudging. I mean, it was an interesting game because Ohio State obviously didn't have the defense it had a year ago back in 2018 and all kinds of things. But the bottom line is, I think Ohio State being a 3.5, 4 touchdown favorite is accurate. But, turnover here, turnover there. I mean, they were big favorites over Rutgers, and you saw what happened. They were up 35-7 against Indiana, and you saw what happened. And I know I'm not equating any of those teams, but if you have a team that doesn't beat itself going against a team that maybe be looking ahead, I don't see Ohio State looking ahead, but, there's always that possibility, right? You could have a game on Saturday. I personally believe Ohio State's going to take care of business. Everybody keeps saying, what are they going to do, like 59-0 like they did in 14 to leave no doubt they should be in? I said, anytime you go in trying to duplicate history, you're doomed in the sense of you're not going to maybe do that. But what they need to do is just play that solid, no doubt about it, dominant game. You agree with me on that, don't you, Awesome?
Yeah, and I think, the point is that Northwestern can put together really solid game plans and be fundamentally sound. Eventually, the talent disparity wins out. It was 45 points in that championship game 2 years ago. It was 52 last year. So 97 points in the last 2 meetings that the Buckeyes have scored against Northwestern. your point is well taken. It's not easy. Northwestern doesn't lay down. They're not going to typically blow a lot of assignments, so you have to win with your superior talent if you're the Buckeyes, and that's what they've done the last couple times. They have great respect for Pat Fitzgerald and that coaching staff. They do not take Northwestern lightly, which I think is why you saw such a dominant effort in that first half last year for the Buckeyes, and they were even a little bit shorthanded in that game. I believe Nicholas Petit-Frere is kind of a surprise starter in that one, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's Northwestern. You line up the rosters. You're not going to find many people there that would start for Ohio State, and that was the same case in Michigan State a couple weeks ago. It's the case for most of the Big Ten, considering how well Ohio State's recruited. But this is a championship game. It's a coach that'll have them ready. You talked about this a number of times. Pat Fitzgerald will look anywhere and everywhere for motivation to get his guys ready. Now, he'd need a lot of it, I think, and a lot of bounces to go his way to upset the Buckeyes. But it's we'll see what happens. Peyton Ramsey does have a 300-yard passing day already in his career against Ohio State, so we'll see if that Buckeyes secondary is ready.
Hey, Illinois linebacker Milo Eifler, basically referred to Northwestern as their little brother, last week. And after that game on Saturday, Fitzgerald said, if anybody would like to say anything derogatory to our players, please do so repeatedly this week. I would greatly appreciate the motivation. I would tell you that was not taken very kindly in our locker room. We've already heard from Jonathan Cooper. As we recorded this, already heard from Jonathan Cooper and Justin Fields. They were quite polite. They gave Northwestern the benefit of the doubt in our interviews this week. So did Ryan Day. But that's the second time in 3 games that Fitzgerald is called on the basically demeaning card to motivate his players. Too bad Michigan State didn't say something bad about him, right? I mean, but the fighting Joey Galloways and whatever he called them, after that the big win earlier, but against Wisconsin. But the bottom line is, this is a puzzling. Let me throw this out there: Northwestern beat Iowa. Would Ohio State be getting even more of a pump this week if it was playing Iowa instead of Northwestern? Do you believe based on the way Iowa is playing the last few games?
I do. And, they had this is another part of the way that college football works. Iowa had their losses early, and now they are, I would say, clearly playing the best football of any team in the West. And, it's a reminder of why you win every single one and why going undefeated is so important in this league, why you get the benefit of the doubt with a rule change for a rule that was only instituted 2 months ago. If you're undefeated and you have a head-to-head tiebreaker, Iowa didn't have that. They're going to go back and kick themselves for the way they played in the first 2 weeks. And it's also just the way that things work. Northwestern was a 3-9 program. They aren't a historical winner. And even if Iowa doesn't really qualify as a major powerhouse program, there's a lot more brand recognition for them. Who knows? I think the perception would be that game meant more. And I think I wouldn't be surprised on Tuesday night if Iowa winds up ranked ahead of Northwestern in the selection committee rankings. We'll see what they're thinking there. But they've been impressive, tough, sound. I think that would have been a better matchup for Ohio State in terms of a resume booster. But, like we talked about earlier, Ohio State really doesn't even need that because they're still dramatically better on paper than Iowa or anyone else in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and as I like to say, Iowa didn't get it done when it had a chance against Northwestern. They've always had trouble with Northwestern. And I would argue, obviously Indiana didn't get it done against Ohio State, so I think the right 2 teams are playing for the Big Ten championship. And another thing that Fitzgerald said about Ohio State, he kind of went Lou Holtz on, a little bit, and he goes, they're a top 4 team. If I had a vote, I'd vote them number 2. They're a complete football team, talking about Ohio State. And obviously the Ohio State's had some question marks about its defense until the last time we got to see them play against Michigan State. And I thought, with the exception of about 4 or 5 plays in that game, they shut Michigan State down. Michigan State went with their backup quarterback and kind of threw like a curveball at Ohio State. And I didn't think the Buckeyes reacted as quickly as they should have there, but eventually they did shut him down too. But what's your sense? Is this Ohio State team? Have we seen enough of this Ohio State team to say that they should be playing their best game on Saturday against Northwestern? I mean, they get their three. Looks like they're going to get their three offensive line starters back. Looks like Duff Borland's going to be back. What is your take on that? Awesome.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate about whether Ohio State benefits from having other than COVID issues. They haven't had to deal with a bunch of injuries because they haven't played as many games. So maybe they're fresh. Maybe they'll be full strength for this postseason run where other teams might not be. But the trade-off for that is they've really not got the game reps and experience this year that you would know. I mean, they're at less than half of a full schedule. Young guys that haven't played, even guys that are starters like Sevin Banks or Marcus Hooker. When we talk about these secondary concerns, they haven't had game opportunities to work all this out, and I think that's a big deal. Because you look at this, I was thinking about somebody like Trey Sermon, and Spencer had this in a story last week that his yards per game have gone up in all 5 games, and that was capped with the explosive runs against Michigan State. You get better, you get more comfortable, you get as those reps come, and that's just one position and one guy. Does the offensive line for Ohio State, if it's fully healthy, does it need those reps? Probably not. Those guys all know what they're doing. But Harry Miller, this is his first year as a starter. Same for Nicholas Petit-Frere. Those guys would be playing at an even higher level, you would assume, if they got to go through a full year and dominate. So I don't mean to be playing at both sides or straddling the fence, but I really think that you could go either way, and it's truly a mixed bag on how this impacts Ohio State, because I don't think that they have reached their potential because they haven't had an opportunity to.
Yeah, they didn't even get spring football, to get some of those things ironed out in their defensive secondary. That's you have to learn. I've seen this time in memoriam covering Ohio State as long as I have. I mean, some of the better cornerbacks you've seen play at Ohio State got burned a lot early.
Yep.
In their career till they moved on and got that experience and stuff. You have to know what you can and can't do, what you can and can't get away with. I thought Jonathan Cooper the other day summed it up pretty well. There's a big difference. As much as you like to go iron sharpens iron in practices, ones against ones, etc. There's a big difference between going against your friend across the line from you, who sees you every day, and he doesn't have that foaming at the mouth kind of approach to you, as opposed to going against a guy who maybe of a slightly lesser ability, but is no friend of yours and wants to take your, in essence, wants to take your wallet, I mean, there's a big difference between game reps and practice reps, no matter who you're going against. I agree with that 100%, and that's the luxury that this team has not had. But with that said, I think you've seen, if you watch Sevin Banks play, I think you've seen him improve as this season's gone along. I think Shaun Wade played very well the last time you saw him out against Michigan State. I thought Marcus Hooker played his most disciplined game yet at safety. Those are big changes or improvements for this Ohio State defense. And we saw what getting Baron Browning and then they're into the middle. I even wrote about it, just the fact how disciplined he played in that game with Justin Hilliard stepping into the full-time role at that outside linebacker spot. Those were huge moments, not just for those players, but for this team, I do believe. And I think there's a good chance you're going to see their best game yet on Saturday at high noon at Lucas Oil Stadium. And that brings up another thing before we go here. I asked Jonathan Cooper at the end of the teleconference the other day, I said, you guys are playing for your 4th straight Big Ten championship. It's crazy. And these are championships won on the field in a playoff setting, which means a Big Ten championship game. And I said, why is Ohio State playing for a 4th Big Ten championship? All the things that have happened this year, all the things that have happened the previous 3 years, what's the common denominator there? And he brought the term brotherhood. And I agree with him 100%. It kind of gave me goosebumps because these guys have found a way. The captains took control of this team. Justin Fields, Jonathan Cooper, those guys. They took control of this team when times were darkest, when it looked like they weren't going to, have a season, when spring got put off and things like that. They kept fighting for their season, especially Justin Fields and Jonathan Cooper. And I don't know if you agree or not, Posturepedic. By the way, Posturepedic, because you got a new mattress today. But I don't know if you agree or not, Awesome. This is a special team unto its own, right?
Yeah, and I think, it's that brotherhood, it's that mentality when it combines with a supremely talented group of people.
Oh, yeah.
And, that does sort of go without saying. But the reason that I believe there's more validity to talking about culture, talking about brotherhood when it comes to the Buckeyes is, well, why doesn't that work for someone like Georgia? Every year that's a top 5 recruiting class and top 5 roster. Well, you're not seeing them even, win one championship, let alone 4 in a row. Why is that? Penn State's not that far removed in terms of talent, at least in the Big Ten. They're the closest. Why are they, struggling to get over the hump? Well, you see a ton of their players entering the transfer portal, and you have puzzling decisions from the coaching staff and misalignment and people that don't seem to want to be part of that. Ohio State hasn't had that issue. Yes, there are occasionally players that leave, that it doesn't work out and it's not a good fit for them, but you've never seen 10 or 12 players at one time trying to leave Ohio State, or Sean Wade and Wyatt Davis were frustrated and ready to opt out. They waited about as long as possible, where other places in the Big Ten, you saw that happening at the first available opportunity because they weren't willing to stick around for that. I think you look at all these things and it's hard to ever quantify what that means, but there's plenty of evidence for how it shows up on the field based on the actions and results.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this alignment, whatever you want to call it, is alive and kicking and is quite real. And when you empower your players like Urban Meyer did, and Ryan Day has followed in the same suit of being the leaders of your team, take ownership of your team. It just pays off for you in the long run. And we'll see if it pays off in a 4th straight Big Ten championship. Those have become kind of like gold pants here, right? Maybe not worth as much as they used to be because there's so many in circulation. But we'll see. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back next week. Awesome. As Austin Ward, I gave him his new nickname, Posturepedic, today. That's an inside joke, but I don't care. I like it. It's great when you have a lot of nicknames. I do believe it means people have an endearment for you. He's also my sous chef, as you well know, as we chop up things and give you this bouillabaisse every week. But until next week, awesome. And for all you fans out there, the Big Ten Championship is on the line. We'll see you then.